The morning the ancient mirror was carried into the palace courtyard, every woman in the kingdom stopped breathing. It arrived wrapped in black cloth, bound with twisted palm rope, carried on the shoulders of 4 elders whose faces were the expression of men transporting something dangerous. Something alive. The crowd parted without being asked. Children pressed against their mothers. Even the palace dogs went silent. And at the center of it all, standing on the high stone steps with his arms folded and his jaw tight, was Prince Adis, the most desired man in 7 kingdoms, and the most afraid he had ever been in his life. If you believe that the ground beneath a person's feet can shift without any earthquake, like this story. Because what was about to happen in this courtyard would shatter everything anyone thought they knew about beauty, and about what it truly means to be seen. The elders set the mirror down on a carved stone plinth in the center of the courtyard. The black cloth was pulled away. And the crowd gasped. It was not beautiful. That was the first surprise. It was an ancient slab of dark bronze, uneven at the edges, its surface swirling with deep green and black like the skin of still water at midnight. The frame was carved from wood so old it had turned silver, studded with tiny cowrie shells and dried seeds that rattled faintly when the wind moved. It looked less like a mirror and more like a door. The chief priest raised his carved staff and his voice came out low and absolute, the kind of voice that does not ask for silence, it simply receives it. This is the eye of truth, he said. It sees what the heart holds, not what the face shows. Any woman who stands before it and finds her reflection pure, clear, and whole is the one the ancestors have chosen. She will be queen. Prince Adis said nothing. He had been saying nothing for 3 days, ever since his father, the great King Obina, had been placed on his ceremonial bed and had not risen again. 3 days since the kingdom had gone quiet. 3 days since the elders had come to him in the dark with the law that felt like a stone dropped into his chest. A king could not be buried until his heir was crowned. An heir could not be crowned without a queen. And Adis had 7 days. 7 days to find a woman the ancestors would accept, or lose the throne to his cousin, and watch his father's spirit wander restless in the space between worlds, unable to rest, unable to cross. He had stood before his father's still body that first night and made a silent promise. He would find her. He had been so certain then. He was less certain now. Because standing behind him, scrubbing ash from the base of the ceremonial torch with a cloth that had seen better years, was a girl he had never once looked at directly. Her name was Neka. She was the palace's most invisible person, a maid who arrived before sunrise and left after dark, who spoke only when spoken to and moved through the palace like water through stone, quiet and purposeful and completely unremarkable to everyone who mattered. She did not look up when the mirror was unveiled. She did not gasp with the crowd. She simply kept walking, her hand moving in steady circles against the stone, her eyes down, her lips moving faintly as if counting her strokes. Adis did not notice her. He was already scanning the crowd of decorated women who had arrived from across the kingdom, bright fabrics, layered beads, practiced smiles aimed at him like arrows. He straightened his shoulders. He told himself it would be over soon. He was wrong. But that was only the beginning. By the second morning, the palace had transformed into something between a festival and a courtroom. Women arrived from every direction, daughters of chiefs, merchants, warriors, and priests. They came draped in hand-woven fabrics that caught the light like fish scales. They came with their hair sculpted into extraordinary shapes, with beads that clicked like rain and perfume that arrived in the courtyard before they did. They came with prepared speeches about their lineage, their virtues, and their cooking. And one by one, they stood before the ancient bronze mirror. And one by one, the mirror showed them nothing. The first woman was the daughter of the most powerful chief in the eastern lands. She walked to the mirror like she was already queen, her chin lifted, her steps measured. She stood before the dark bronze surface and waited, her expression confident, almost bored. The mirror swirled. It did not clear. Not even the outline of her nose appeared. She stood there a full minute, her confidence slowly cuddling into something else, before she turned and walked away without speaking. The second woman tried a different approach. She bowed low before the mirror, murmuring what sounded like a prayer, her hands pressed together. She held the position for so long that one of the elders coughed. The mirror stayed dark as a closed eye. The third woman, a beauty so striking that the men in the crowd had stopped blinking, stepped forward with a slow smile, as if the mirror would simply be overwhelmed by the sight of her. It was not. By the end of the first day, 30 women had stood before the bronze and received nothing. 30 reflections withheld. 30 public humiliations absorbed with varying degrees of dignity. Adi sat on his raised seat and watched all of it with the expression of a man watching water drain from a cracked bowl. Beside him, his most trusted servant, old Emika, leaned in and murmured, "My prince. Perhaps the mirror is broken." "The mirror is not broken," the chief priest said, from 3 feet away, without turning his head. Emika did not speak again. That evening, Adis walked the palace alone. He passed the kitchens and heard the sound of a clay pot being set down carefully, the sound of water being poured with intention. He stopped without meaning to. Through the half-open door he saw Neka, the maid, kneeling beside a wooden basin, washing the vessels used in the day's ceremony, a task no one had assigned her, a task that simply needed doing. She was humming something low and old, a melody without obvious beginning or end. She worked with the kind of focus that belongs to people who find dignity in small things, who do not need an audience to do their best work. Adis watched her for a moment he would not have been able to explain, then moved on. He did not connect what he felt in that moment to anything important. He had bigger things to worry about. 4 days remained. And not one woman in the kingdom had been seen by the mirror. What he didn't know yet was that the mirror had already seen exactly who it was waiting for. On the 5th night, Adis stopped pretending. He dismissed his attendants, pulled off his ceremonial outer robe, and sat on the cold stone floor of the inner sanctum in nothing but a plain wrapper, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, looking less like a prince and more like a boy who had lost something he couldn't name. The parade of women had continued through days 3 and 4. More faces, more fabric, more practiced grace standing before the ancient bronze and receiving only silence. The pile of discarded flowers and abandoned beaded fans near the palace gate had grown into a small mountain. The village was beginning to whisper. He had heard them that afternoon at the far edge of the courtyard, 2 older women speaking in the specific tone people use when they believe they cannot be overheard. "His cousin Ikena already has a wife," one said. "A good woman. Come. Hardworking. It is the gods' way," the other replied. "The gods do not force a crown onto an unready head. They wait." He had walked past them without changing his expression. But the words had followed him all the way to the sanctum floor. His father's voice came to him in the silence. Not a vision. Not a dream. Just a memory, painfully clear. He had been perhaps 15 years old, sitting in the obi while his father received a dispute between 2 farmers. After the farmers left, the king had turned to his son and said something Adis had laughed at then and never thought about again until this moment. "Adis," the king had said, "the easiest thing in the world is to be impressive. The hardest thing is to be real. Any man can shine. Very few men can be trusted in the dark." Adis put his forehead against his knees. His father had been trying to tell him something. He had been too full of himself to receive it. A sound reached him from outside, soft, rhythmic, grounded. He stood, moved to the narrow window, and looked down into the courtyard below. It was past the middle of the night. The courtyard should have been empty. It was not. Neka was there. She was moving between the ceremonial lamps set along the courtyard walls, checking each one, trimming the wicks with a small tool, refilling the oil from a clay flask she carried at her hip. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was almost musical, no wasted motion, no performance, simply a woman making sure the sacred flames would not go out before dawn. Because if they went out before dawn during the morning period, it was considered a terrible omen. Everyone in the palace knew this. And everyone in the palace had apparently decided it was someone else's responsibility. Everyone except her. Adis felt something shift in his chest. Not the hot, restless feeling he associated with attraction. Something steadier than that. Something that felt like recognition. He watched her move from lamp to lamp until she reached the last one at the far corner, checked it, topped it up, and straightened, and for a brief moment, she tilted her head back and looked at the sky, just looked at it, the way a person looks at something they find genuinely beautiful without needing anyone to confirm it. Then she picked up her flask and walked back inside. He stayed at the window long after she was gone. 2 days remained. And for the first time, Adis was not thinking about the mirror or the crown or the burial rites or his cousin Ikena's patient wife. He was thinking about a girl who tended flames in the dark because someone had to. He didn't know what to do with that thought yet. But something had cracked open inside him that he would not be able to close. The 6th day arrived with a sky the color of old silver, clouds pressed low over the kingdom as if the sky itself were paying attention. Word had spread overnight across the palace, across the village, across the neighboring settlements and their gossips and their fast feet, that the mirror had rejected every woman who stood before it. 112 women. 112 dark reflections. People were no longer laughing. They were no longer competitive. They were afraid. An object that looks at 112 beautiful, accomplished, decorated women and sees nothing is not a broken object. It is an object with very specific requirements. The chief priest convened the elders at dawn. Adis stood before them in the grey morning light, and for the first time in the entire proceeding he did not try to project confidence. He simply stood there, his hands at his sides, and told them the truth. "I have been the wrong kind of man," he said. "I have spent my life being seen and never doing the work of seeing. I do not know if I deserve the crown. But I know my father's spirit deserves to rest. Tell me what the mirror needs." The oldest elder, a woman so ancient she had attended the coronation of Adis' grandfather, looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "The mirror does not need to be told anything, child. It has already decided. The difficulty is that you have been looking in the wrong direction." Adis frowned. "What do you mean?" But the old woman simply closed her eyes, as if she had said enough. The 7th day was tomorrow. If the sun set tomorrow with no answer, the transition of power would begin. That afternoon, the palace needed water. The courtyard ceremony had been continuous for 6 days, and the great clay pots at the 4 corners of the sacred space had been drained dry by the thirsty crowd, the washing of hands between rites, the demands of money. It was a small logistics problem in the middle of an enormous one. Neka was sent to the forest stream. She did not know what day it was in the official count of the crisis. She knew only that the pots were empty, that the elders needed to wash before the evening rites, and that the stream was a 20-minute walk. She lifted a large clay vessel onto the woven grass ring balanced on her head, adjusted it with practiced ease, and walked. She thought about her mother on that walk, her mother who was ill, whose medicines cost money Neka earned here in the palace, scrubbing and fetching and mending. She thought about what she would cook that evening if she finished early. She hummed the melody she always hummed, the one her mother had taught her as a girl, the one about rain that falls on rich soil and poor soil alike and calls none of it its own. She was not thinking about the mirror. She was not thinking about the prince. She was thinking about the weight on her head and the path under her feet and whether there would be yam in the kitchen when she returned. When she came back through the palace gates and crossed toward the kitchen entrance, she noticed the guards had moved. The path was blocked. She would have to cross through the main courtyard. She hesitated for just a moment, the ceremony area, the elders, the prince, the mirror, all of it was there, and she was just a maid with a water pot who did not belong in the middle of any of it. But the elders needed to wash. She tightened her grip on the vessel above her head and walked forward, keeping her eyes down, staying to the edges, trying to be invisible in the way she had spent years perfecting. She almost made it. She was 3 paces from the center of the courtyard, her feet finding the red earth with their usual quiet certainty, when the air changed. The sound came first. A low hum, almost below hearing, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears, a resonance that rose from the stone plinth where the mirror sat, spreading outward through the courtyard like the vibration of a struck bell traveling through water. People stopped mid-breath. The elders rose from their seats. The chief priest took 3 fast steps toward the plinth, his eyes locked on the bronze surface with an expression that had moved far beyond professional composure into something raw and electric. The mirror was moving. Its dark surface, still and dull for 6 days, was now rippling. Not like metal. Like water. Like deep water disturbed from below, the green-black swirling shifting, breaking apart, and then, light. It did not arrive gradually. It erupted. A warm, golden blaze poured from the surface of the ancient bronze, not the harsh glare of fire but the deep, still radiance of late afternoon sun through old amber, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it was always meant to be exactly where it is. The crowd cried out. Hands flew to eyes. The chief priest stood frozen, his staff raised to his chest as if in defense. And Neka stopped walking. The water pot remained perfectly balanced on her head, which was extraordinary because every other part of her had gone very still. She did not understand what was happening. She knew only that the air tasted different, that the ground under her feet felt more solid than it had a moment ago, as if the earth had leaned in, and that the warm light was coming from the direction of the covered mirror she had walked past every day for 6 days without giving much thought to. She turned her head slowly and looked at it. And the bronze showed her something that made the breath leave her body entirely. She was in the mirror. Not the woman she was in the courtyard, dust on her shoulders, one wrapper, water pot on her head. What stood in the bronze was someone else and someone completely her at the same time. The reflection was clothed the color of midnight edged with gold. Her hair was dressed in the style of ancient queens, tall and sculpted, threaded with coral and ivory. Her bearing was not performed, it was simply what her natural posture became when the smallness that difficulty imposes was removed from it. And behind her in the reflection, just visible at the edges of the light, stood figures, tall, still, their hands resting on her shoulders, their faces obscured but their intention clear. The ancestors were not crowning her. They were confirming her. They had always known. The courtyard had gone absolutely silent. No one moved. The only sound was the drip of water from the sides of Neka's pot, which had begun to tilt as her arms registered the shock her face had not yet found words for. Drip. 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 Adi stood up from his throne. He did not look at the mirror. He looked at her. He saw her trembling. Not with greed. Not with triumph. With pure, unguarded shock, the shock of someone who has been seen for the first time and does not know what to do with it. And in that moment, watching her tremble with humility in the center of the golden light, Adis understood everything his father had tried to tell him. A real person. Standing in real light. And he had walked past her every day. He stepped down from the raised dais. Not the measured, deliberate descent of a man managing his image. He simply moved, quickly, across the courtyard, the red earth under his feet, no carpet, no ceremony, until he was standing before her. The water pot finally lost its balance. It tilted, slipped, and shattered on the stone, and the water rushed out across both their feet in a cold, sudden wave. Neka looked down at the broken clay, and her first instinct, her absolute first instinct, even now, even here, was to apologize for the mess. I am sorry, she whispered. The elders needed water. I will clean this. Adis looked at the broken pieces of clay at their feet. Then he did something no one in the kingdom had ever seen a prince do. He knelt down. Not before the elders. Not before the chief priest. Before her. He picked up a shard of the broken pot, his fine ceremonial wrapper trailing in the wet earth, and he looked up at her from the ground, and he said, loud enough for every elder and every guard and every wide-eyed face pressed against the courtyard walls to hear, I have let other people clean my messes my entire life. I will clean this one myself. The chief priest found his voice. It came out shaking, which no one had ever heard before. The eye of truth has spoken, he said. The ancestors have confirmed. The search is over. They brought her to the inner chambers as the sun began its descent, the sky layering itself in deep orange and violet above the kingdom as if the heavens were dressing for the occasion. The eldest women of the royal bloodline, women who had presided over coronations and name-givings and burials with the specific authority that comes from having witnessed enough of life to be unimpressed by most of it, surrounded Necker and led her gently away from the broken clay, away from the golden light, away from the stunned crowd, and into the world that was about to become hers. She did not speak much in those first hours. There was too much happening inside her for words to organize themselves usefully. She thought about her mother, and that thought was the most urgent one. She needed to send word, needed her mother to know. She thought about the kitchen and the pots she had left soaking. She thought about the lamp in the east corridor that had been guttering for 2 days and whether anyone else had noticed it needed a new wick. These were the thoughts of a woman who had spent her life attending to things that needed attending to. And even now, standing in rooms she had only ever cleaned from the edges, her instincts were still toward the useful, the practical, the overlooked. The women bathed her in water steeped with herbs that smelled like rain-soaked earth and something sweeter underneath. They dressed her in royal cloth of deep blue and green, heavy and soft at once, cloth that moved differently from anything she had ever worn, not because it was finer, though it was, but because it was made for a body that was not supposed to make itself small. They placed the coral beads, ancient, heavy, warm from being stored close to the body, around her neck in layers. They smoothed oil into her hair and dressed it high, threading through it the pieces that had belonged to the queens before her. When they led her to the mirror, a regular mirror this time, polished bronze without ceremony, she looked at herself for a long time. Not with vanity. With the careful attention of a person trying to reconcile two true things that do not yet feel like the same person. Adis was waiting in the outer ceremonial hall. When she entered, he stood. He had been sitting, which was unusual for a prince in ceremony. He stood the moment she appeared, and he did not look at the crown they had placed on her head or the beads at her throat. He looked at her face. I owe you something, he said. She waited. I owe you the truth that I should have said long before today. You have been here, doing the real work of this palace, and I walked past you as if the air around you were empty. I am ashamed of that. And I am asking, not as a prince, not because the mirror chose you and I have no other option, I am asking you, as a man who finally understands the difference between what shines and what lasts, whether you will stand beside me and show me every day what it looks like to actually be good at this. Necker looked at him for a long moment. She was not looking for deception. She was simply looking, the way she had looked at everything her whole life, straight on, without flinching, without performing a response she had not actually felt yet. You broke open, she said finally. I watched it happen across these 7 days. That is the only reason I am still standing here. She paused. A broken open person can be filled with something true. I will stand beside you. But the moment I see you closing back up, I will tell you. Plainly. And you will have to decide what you do with that. He nodded. I would expect nothing less. They stood together before the arrow, the great drum, as the stars began to appear. They exchanged the kola knot in the old way, and the chief priest spoke the words that had been spoken at the beginning of every royal union in the kingdom's long memory. The ceremony was not long. The meaning inside it was vast. And when the burial fire for King Obinna was finally lit at the edge of the royal grounds, its flames climbed high and straight into the windless night sky without wavering. The sign, the elder said, that a spirit has found its peace, that it leaves the world knowing the things it built will be tended by worthy hands. Adis watched the fire with tears he did not try to hide, and beside him, Neka placed her hand over his without speaking. She had learned long ago that some moments do not need words.